At 9:04 a.m. on a Monday in July, the investor livestream out of Ashburn, Virginia froze mid-sentence, and 41 client environments across 6 time zones went quietly dark. I was $693,000 into paying off my wife's cancer treatment, and I was sitting at my own kitchen table when it happened, not theirs. I took a slow sip of coffee and watched the muted financial feed cut to a technical difficulties card. My name is Adam Ellery. I'm 56 years old, and for 24 years I was the principal systems architect who kept Viridian Edge systems standing. 3 days earlier, they'd walked me out the door. The corporate language for it was organizational realignment. Effective immediately, I no longer had system access, a badge, or a desk. Nobody had scheduled a handover meeting because nobody who signed off on it understood there was anything left to hand over. On the counter in front of me sat a worn leather badge holder, empty now, the plastic card gone, the leather soft and cracked from 24 years of writing in the same coat pocket. I remembered the sound the reader made at the lobby desk that Friday. A flat electronic bleat, then a second one, the security officer frowning at her screen while my badge sat half reprogrammed in the slot, neither active nor fully dead. She apologized twice. I told her not to worry about it. I meant that more literally than she understood. I hadn't touched a single server since. I want to be clear about that before I explain the rest, because everyone who called me that morning assumed otherwise. I hadn't broken anything, hadn't logged into anything, hadn't sent one line of code toward Viridian's infrastructure since the door closed behind me. I had simply stopped doing something nobody was paying me to do anymore, and let a rule I hadn't written for them, but had signed 24 years earlier, do exactly what it was built to do. The system that failed that morning wasn't a server. It was a promise I'd made to myself back when I still trusted the people running the company, that if they ever forgot what held their platform together, the platform would remind them for me. I called it protocol, mostly to myself, because it needed a name, and the thing I check every Friday never sounded serious enough out loud. Nobody on the executive floor had asked what it stood for in 9 years. They'd have known, if anyone had ever bothered to read the appendix. By the time the live stream cut out, I already understood something the finance people watching from Reston and McLean did not. That frozen screen wasn't the beginning of anything. I finished my coffee. The kitchen was quiet in the particular way an empty house gets quiet at 9 a.m. on a weekday. No dishwasher, no radio, just the refrigerator cycling somewhere behind me. Somewhere in Ashburn, 41 client environments were sitting in a dormant state that only my credentials could lift, and the man who had told a packed conference room, weeks earlier, that my work was analog risk was still on camera, still smiling, still 4 minutes from understanding what he had decoupled. I set my mug down next to the empty badge holder. Whatever he thought he'd already survived, the real clock hadn't been running for 4 minutes. It had been running for 3 days, and it wasn't his to stop. To understand why that live stream froze, you have to understand what a Friday used to look like for me. For 24 years, I drove out to the Ashburn campus every Friday morning, badge holder in my coat pocket, and walked the data hall before most of the building had finished its first pot of coffee. I didn't need a maintenance dashboard to tell me which rack was running hot. After that many years, I could hear it in the pitch of the cooling fans, the same way a mechanic hears a bearing going bad 3 days before it fails. I'd stop at rack 14, key my personal credential into the console by the vault cluster, and confirm what I already knew. Everything downstream of me was still breathing. That confirmation had a name. Protocol required one signed check-in every 7 days from its principal architect, me, or the systems it protected would fail over into a dormant, locked state until that architect's credentials reauthorized them. I'd written it that way on purpose, back when Viridian was 11 people in a leased office above a tire shop, because the founders and I had agreed on one thing. Whatever we built, it should never depend on anyone remembering to trust it. Harold Turner had been there since the tire shop days too. He ran infrastructure operations before I did, then beside me, then mostly in an advisory capacity once his knees stopped tolerating the concrete floors. He still carried a paper logbook everywhere, distrustful of any dashboard he couldn't annotate by hand. "You're the only one who reads the fine print anymore, Ellery," he told me once, closing the logbook with the flat snap of a man who'd said it for a decade. I didn't answer. I kept walking the row. None of that came free. My wife Diane's treatment had run 3 years by then, and every Friday I drove to Ashburn instead of sleeping in was a Friday I wasn't at an infusion appointment. I never once told anyone at Veridian that. It wasn't the company's business, and I'd learned early that a man who explains his sacrifices out loud usually stops making them. I kept the badge holder in the same coat pocket for 24 years because I never had a reason to buy a new one. What protocol protected wasn't glamorous. Routing tables, license servers, the vault cluster that 41 enterprise clients depended on without knowing my name. Nobody in the executive suite had ever asked how the failover actually worked. They only knew it worked, the way people know a bridge holds weight without asking who calibrated the load bearings. That was the arrangement for 24 years. I showed up, checked in, and the company never had to think about what would happen if I didn't. Nobody signed a memo about it. Nobody needed to. The compliance registry had my name listed as principal signatory on the licensing agreement since the year Veridian filed its first patent, and licensing agreements, unlike executives, don't forget who signed them. The funny thing about a rule like that is it never asks anyone to believe in it. It doesn't care whether the people upstairs remember it exists, whether they've read the licensing agreement, or whether they think a 7-day check-in is quaint. It just keeps running, Friday after Friday, the console light blinking green under my thumb, whether anyone upstairs is paying attention or not, right up until the week somebody upstairs decides they aren't, and finds out the rule was never actually asking their permission. Tarun Mehta had been Veridian's chief operating officer for 14 months when he stood up in front of the entire engineering org and called my life's work a liability. It was a Friday, 3 weeks before they fired me, in the glass-walled town hall room. Tarun clicked his stylus against his knuckle, the way he did in every meeting, punctuating sentences whether they deserved it or not. "We're decoupling legacy dependencies ahead of the roadshow," he said. "Investors want a platform that scales without heroics. No single points of failure, human or otherwise." "Which system are you calling a single point of failure?" I asked. "Protocol. The manual heartbeat thing." He said it the way you describe a fax machine. "It's analog risk. One person, one credential, one Friday morning. That's not infrastructure, Adam. That's a hobby. It's kept 41 client environments online for 9 years. It's kept them online so far." He smiled at the room, not at me. "We're modernizing the failover architecture. Fully automated, fully redundant, no dependency on any single employee's calendar." "Modernizing to what, specifically?" "A vendor platform. Enterprise grade." "Is it installed?" He paused half a second too long. "It's contracted." "Contracted isn't installed," I said. "Who signs off on the cutover? Who confirms the new system actually works before protocol gets decommissioned?" "We'll have a transition plan," he said, already looking past me toward the next slide. "That's not what I asked." "Adam," he set the stylus down, patient the way people are patient with something they've already decided to stop listening to. "Nobody's saying your work wasn't valuable. We're just not a company that runs on tribal knowledge anymore. It's not tribal knowledge. It's a signed licensing agreement with my name on it. Then update it. That requires my signature too. Have you read it?" "I've read a summary." "A summary isn't the agreement. You're welcome to read the full document. 9 pages. I'll send it today." "I don't need 9 pages, Adam. I need a modern platform." "You need both. Right now you only have one." He laughed, genuinely amused, and clicked the stylus once more. "It's already working. I checked the roadmap myself." "The roadmap isn't the system, Tarun. It never is personal," I said, "right up until it stops working." "Nothing's stopping," he said. "Nothing's going to stop." I let that sit. He hadn't checked anything. He'd read a summary of a system that still had my name on it as the only person authorized to sign off on its retirement. A few engineers exchanged a glance. Tarun moved to a chart showing projected savings from operational streamlining, a category that, I'd learn later, had my salary and protocols maintenance line listed together. Walking out, I turned over a question his slides never answered. At what point does calling a 9-year safeguard a hobby become the more dangerous hobby? I kept it to myself. This channel is still new, and I don't take for granted that anyone stays through a story this quiet. If you're still here, that's the only reason there's another one tomorrow. I didn't argue further. Arguing with a man who thinks a rule is a suggestion has never once changed the rule's behavior. Only his opinion of you. I closed my notebook, the badge holder resting in my coat pocket, and let him finish his slides. What he called analog risk had a formal name in the compliance registry, a signed licensing agreement, and a principal architect who hadn't missed a Friday in 9 years. None of that showed up on his slide. 3 weeks later, on a Friday morning, HR pulled me out of the break room mid-coffee, my mug still half full on the counter, and put me in a conference room with Tarun, a lawyer I'd never met, and a folder that already had my name printed on the tab. "Adam, thank you for coming in," Tarun said, like I'd had a choice. "This is a difficult conversation, but I want to be transparent. We're restructuring the infrastructure org. Your position is being eliminated, effective today." "Which position?" I asked. "Principal architect or principal signatory?" He blinked. "I'm not sure I follow. The compliance registry lists both. I'm asking which one you think you just eliminated." The lawyer glanced at Tarun. Tarun clicked his stylus once and slid the folder across the table instead of answering. "The severance package is generous. 6 months pay, benefits through the end of the year. We valued the restructuring at $12.01 million in annualized savings. Most of it from protocol's maintenance line." He didn't answer that directly. "Most of it from consolidating legacy contracts." "Does the severance agreement mention protocol at all?" I asked. "The what?" "The failover system. The one you called analog risk 3 weeks ago. That's being handled by the platform team going forward," he said, already standing, already done with the meeting in his own head. "Handled how specifically?" "They'll figure out the details. There's a check-in due this morning." "Who's covering it?" "Adam." He said my name the way you'd say it to a child asking one question too many. "I appreciate the diligence, even now. Genuinely. But you don't work here anymore." "That's not an answer." "Who's covering it?" "Nobody needs to cover a manual heartbeat that's already being decommissioned." "It isn't decommissioned. It's still live. Somebody needs to authenticate this morning, or it fails over." "Fails over to what?" "A dormant state. Read-only." I wrote the specification myself. "That sounds like a you problem to describe, not a me problem to solve," he said, and something in his own phrasing seemed to please him. "Protocol is not going to be the thing that keeps me up at night." "It should be," I said. "It's the only thing in this building that's never once been wrong." He didn't answer that. He nodded at the lawyer, who closed a laptop that had sat open and unused the entire meeting. "IT will walk you out and collect your badge," the lawyer said. "Understood," I said, and meant it more literally than either of them did. I didn't argue or ask for more money. I capped my pen, closed the folder, and let a security escort walk me to the lobby. The badge reader glitched mid-refill, a flat electronic bleat, then a second one, while the desk officer tried to deactivate a credential that hadn't failed once in 24 years. "Sorry," she said. "System's being weird today." I told her it happened. I meant that more generally than she understood. Nobody from HR asked what protocol required to keep running, because that would have meant admitting $12 million in savings sat on a system that still needed a Friday check-in from a man they'd just walked out the door. That was their first real mistake, and it wasn't the badge reader, and it wasn't the folder. Somewhere in a filing cabinet at Veridian sat a licensing agreement with my signature on it. The actual document, not the summary Tarun had glanced at once, and nobody in that building had thought to open it before deciding what $12 million was actually worth. I drove home Friday afternoon and sat at the kitchen table with a document I hadn't looked at in years. The badge holder came out of my coat pocket first, empty, and I set it down on the table before I went looking for the folder. Diane found me there an hour later, still reading. "You're not going back in, are you?" she said. It wasn't really a question. "No," I said. "I don't think there's anything left to go back to." The document was a licensing agreement, 9 pages, signed the year Veridian filed its first patent, back when the founders needed someone to build a failsafe they'd never have to think about again. I drafted the language myself with an attorney friend from Harold's old Navy unit, because even then I understood that a system nobody could be fired away from was worth more than a raise. Page 4 was the part that mattered. Protocol's continuation required a signed check-in from its principal architect every 7 days. If 42 hours passed after a missed deadline with no check-in, every dependent client environment failed over automatically into a dormant, read-only state, reversible by nothing except my own credentials. That check-in had been due that same morning, 9 o'clock, the exact hour I was sitting in a conference room being told my position no longer existed. Nobody had asked me to perform it before walking me out. Nobody, technically, could have. The badge that would have gotten me into the data hall was already sitting dead in a drawer at the front desk. I wasn't going to log in remotely to save them from that math. Nothing in my severance agreement required it, and nothing in the 9 pages on the table in front of me gave Viridian the right to compel a check-in from someone they'd already terminated. I laid the pages out under the kitchen light, one at a time, and photographed each one front and back. The paper gone soft and yellowed at the edges, my own signature younger and more careless than the one I signed things with now. I emailed the scans to my attorney with a 2-line note and a timestamp. Then, the following Monday, I drove to the post office and mailed a certified copy, so there would be a federal postmark on the record showing exactly when I'd stopped being obligated to do anything at all. A small, ordinary errand that would matter more than anything I'd done at Viridian in the previous 6 months. Harold called that evening. "You didn't do anything," he said. "It wasn't a question either." "No," I said. "I didn't do anything. That's the whole point. They're going to say you did. They can say whatever they want. The registry says I'm still the signatory. The agreement says the check-in was mine to give, not theirs to demand. I gave 24 years of Fridays for free. I'm not giving this one." Harold was quiet for a moment. 42 hours, he said finally, like he was doing the arithmetic out loud. "That puts it early Sunday morning. Give or take." "And the investor call?" "Monday morning," I said. I checked. I didn't sabotage a single line of that platform. I didn't break in, didn't delete anything, didn't send one instruction to a single server. I signed nothing, revoked nothing, touched nothing. I simply let a rule I'd honored for 24 years keep doing, without me, exactly what it had always been built to do the moment nobody honored it back. Friday afternoon, within 2 hours of walking me out, Tarun sent a company-wide message announcing that Viridian had fully decoupled legacy operational risk ahead of Monday's investor session. He copied the board. He copied the pre-IPO advisory firm. Sarah Finch called my cell Saturday morning. I didn't recognize the number. "Mr. Ellery? This is Sarah Finch, Site Reliability. Harold gave me your number. I hope that's all right." "It's fine, Sarah. What can I do for you?" "Protocol's heartbeat monitor hasn't pinged since 9 yesterday morning. I filed a ticket last night. My manager closed it this morning. Legacy service, decoupled per Friday's announcement, non-critical. I reopened it once. I wanted to ask you directly. Is that actually true?" "I can't answer that. I don't work there anymore. I'm not asking as an employee, Mr. Ellery. I'm asking as someone who used to own the system. I can't tell you what to trust, Sarah. I can tell you I never once saw that monitor go quiet for a reason that turned out to be nothing in 9 years. That's not really an answer. It's the only one I've got for you today. The service is still returning environment data," she said. "That doesn't sound decoupled to me." "No," I said. "It doesn't." She was quiet for a second. "Thank you for being straight with me. You already knew. You just wanted someone to say it back." The line went quiet the way a call goes quiet when someone's decided not to say the rest of what they're thinking. She thanked me again and hung up. Harold called that evening. 2 on-call engineers were in the break room when Sarah's ticket closed, he said. One of them said, "Guess Protocol finally retired quietly, unlike Adam." What did the other one say? Nothing quiet about a guy who makes the badge readers glitch on his way out. Sarah heard both. Reported them to me flat, no commentary. She's careful that way. She called me this morning. I said. She what? Asked if the ticket closure was true. I told her I couldn't answer that anymore, and that I don't work there. Adam, if anyone finds out you talked to her. I didn't tell her anything she didn't already know. Harold, I answered exactly what she asked, the same way I've answered everyone this week. Monday's talking points went through 3 drafts this weekend, Harold said. Tarun wants 0 legacy dependency in the opening slide. Comms pushed back once, got overruled. Has anyone asked whether the automated system is actually installed? Nobody's asked. Tarun told them it was 3 weeks ago and again Friday. Then nobody's going to check it before Monday. Doesn't look like it. He's got the roadshow feed scheduled for 9 sharp. Wants the platform demo running clean before the market opens. I didn't hear anything else until Sunday night. What I did that weekend was smaller. I mowed the lawn, took Diane to a follow-up appointment, and watched a ball game with the sound off, my phone face down on the counter, exactly where it had sat every weekend for 24 years. Nobody at Viridian would have believed how little I thought about any of it. I'd already said everything I had to say, on paper, with a postmark. 42 hours is not a long time when you're counting down toward a deadline. It is an extraordinarily long time when you don't know one exists. Viridian spent nearly all of theirs congratulating itself on a decision nobody with the authority to make it had verified, checked, or read past the summary slide. The dormant state triggered at 3:14 Sunday morning, according to the timestamp Harold read me later. I was asleep, the house quiet except for the refrigerator cycling somewhere down the hall. Nobody at Viridian noticed until Monday, because nobody was watching a dashboard for a system they'd told the whole company was already gone. I was at my kitchen table by 8:50, coffee, the financial news muted on the counter TV, Diane still asleep upstairs. At 8:58 the pre-IPO roadshow feed came up, Tarun and two board members in front of a Viridian backdrop, a countdown graphic ticking toward the live platform demo. At 9 o'clock he started talking about resilience without heroics. At 9:04, mid-sentence, the screen behind him, the one meant to show 41 client dashboards updating in real time, froze on a gray loading icon and stayed there. He kept talking for almost 90 seconds before someone off-camera told him something in his earpiece, and he asked the room, on a live feed, to give us just a moment, technical issue. It was not a moment. My phone started buzzing at 9:07. I let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again at 9:11, 9:14, twice more before 9:30, numbers I recognized and one I didn't. I made toast, the bread going in slow, ordinary, 10 minutes into whatever was happening 40 minutes away. Harold called at 9:52, and I picked up. It's not just the demo, he said, no greeting. Client dashboards are down across the board. NOCs pulling console prompts asking for an architect credential that hasn't existed here since Friday. What does the prompt say? Something about a licensing authority. Nobody down here can read past the first line. It'll say protocol requires principal architect reauthorization, I said. My employee ID, formatted the way it was 9 years ago. You knew this exactly. I wrote it. Legal just walked in. So did the board. Someone from the bank underwriting the IPO is asking whether this needs disclosure as a security incident. What's Tarun telling them? A legacy configuration issue being resolved. Nobody can tell him how, or by whom, or when. Finance already ran the number. Adam, at a $6 billion run rate, every hour this platform stays fully dark is something like $685,000. Gone, whether anyone signs anything or not. I didn't set that rate, Harold. I just finally stopped covering for what happens when nobody's watching it. Should you have said something? Before now. I said everything 3 weeks ago, in a room full of engineers. Nobody wrote it down but me. There's a retailer mid-inventory sync on the affected list. A logistics firm with same-day shipments stuck in a queue that isn't routing anywhere. Those are the calls making the room go quiet. Not the investors, actual clients asking when they come back online. I finished my toast. Outside, a mower ran 2 houses down, ordinary and indifferent to what was happening in Ashburn. Diane came downstairs, saw my face, and asked if it had started. It started Friday, I said. This is just the part where they noticed. By 11, Harold said, someone had finally located the compliance registry and read my name off page 1. That's when the calls stopped being missed, he said, and started being answered. Not by me. Not yet. No, Harold said. By a boardroom full of people finally asking the one question that should have come 3 weeks ago. Who actually held the keys to the thing they called obsolete? Harold called back at 11:40 and asked if I'd get on a video line. Board wants to talk, he said. So does Tarun. I joined from the kitchen table, coffee long since cold, Diane sitting just out of frame with her arms crossed. 11 faces filled the screen. 2 board members, general counsel, the underwriter, Harold, and Tarun, who looked like a man who had aged through 5 stages of grief since 9 that morning. Adam, Tarun started, I want to be direct with you. We have a technical situation, and your name is attached to the resolution path. We'd like you to log in and restore service. For free, I said. This morning. We can discuss compensation. You discussed compensation on Friday. 12.01 million in savings, I believe you called it. That's not. He glanced sideways, off camera, at someone I couldn't see. That's a technicality. No, I said. That's your platform. General counsel cut in before Tarun could recover. Mr. Ellery, are you willing to restore the system? I'm willing to discuss restoring it. Those aren't the same offer he just made. What would restoration require? How long before you can bring it back? Tarun cut in. Once we agree to terms. Under an hour. It's not a rebuild. It's a signature. An hour. He said it like the number offended him personally. You've had this platform down for 3 hours over a technicality, and you're telling me the fix takes 60 seconds of your time? The fix takes one signature from the only person legally authorized to give it, I said. You spent 3 weeks deciding that person didn't matter. I spent 3 days finding out you were wrong. Neither of those was my mistake to fix on your schedule. This is extortion. Extortion is a legal term, General Counsel said quietly, and I'd advise against using it on a recorded call about a licensing agreement your COO signed off on eliminating without reading it in full. It was the first thing she'd said since the meeting started, and it landed like a verdict. Tarun didn't say anything else for a while. I'd written the terms that morning, mostly to have something to do with my hands. Reinstatement of protocol as an independently licensed service, formal recognition of my signatory role, a market rate retainer for ongoing maintenance, and restored pension and benefits for every engineer let go under the same restructuring. I paused. No NDA. I'm not interested in helping this story disappear. Silence on the line for 3 full seconds. I counted, out of habit. Tarun tried once more. Adam, be reasonable. Every hour this drags on. It's already too late for reasonable, I said. Reasonable was 3 weeks ago, when I told you protocol wasn't a hobby. You had a chance to check the fine print before you decided what $12 million was worth. You're welcome to check it now, at whatever it's worth after a live-streamed outage. The board member who'd stayed silent the whole call finally spoke. Legal drafted. All of it. She didn't look at Tarun when she said it. Harold sent me a new badge that afternoon, overnight, sitting in a plain white envelope on my porch by 6. I turned it over once in my hand, then set it beside the old one on the kitchen table, cracked leather next to unmarked plastic, 24 years next to 0. I hadn't decided yet which one I was going to carry. I only knew I'd be the one deciding. Legal finished the paperwork by 6 that evening, faster than I'd seen Viridian move on anything in 24 years. I signed from the kitchen table, the same place I'd been sitting since 9:00 for that morning, and logged into a console I hadn't touched in 3 days. The reauthorization took 40 seconds. I typed my credential, confirmed the principal architect's signature, and watched 41 client environments come out of dormant state in the order they'd gone dark, like a string of porch lights switching back on down a long block. I didn't feel triumphant. Mostly I felt tired, the specific tired that comes after holding still for exactly as long as holding still was required. The final terms landed close to what I'd asked for that morning. Protocol reinstated as an independently licensed service under a retainer worth just under $7 million. Formal signatory recognition restored in writing, and pension and benefits reinstated for 6 engineers Viridian had let go in the prior year's streamlining. No NDA. Nobody asked me to apologize. Tarun stayed on for 11 more weeks, in a role that touched nothing the board wanted a second opinion on. He resigned that October, before the IPO he'd rushed toward ever-priced. Harold told me he'd found Tarun's office already half-cleared that last week. No boxes from facilities, just his own briefcase and the company-branded stylus left uncapped on the bare desk, rolling half an inch every time someone walked past. I heard he took a role at a smaller firm, presumably still calling something a hobby. I didn't feel the need to find out. I didn't go back to Viridian, not as an employee. Harold retired a year later and consults for me 2 days a week, still carrying the same paper logbook. Sarah Finch left 6 months after the outage. Her manager never apologized for closing that ticket, and she's been my first hire since, running monitoring for the small continuity advisory firm I started that fall. We're not glamorous. We help companies write the kind of rule that only matters once, and hope they never have to learn it the hard way. I still carry the badge holder, though there's no badge in it anymore. I keep it because I made a habit once of checking on something nobody was watching, and old habits, unlike executives, don't need anyone's permission to keep going. I never touched a single server that week. I never broke anything, hacked anything, or asked anyone to suffer for my sake. I just stopped doing something nobody was paying me to do anymore, and let a rule I'd honored for 24 years do, without me, exactly what it had always been built to do. People ask sometimes whether it felt good, watching it happen. It didn't, really. Mostly it felt like waiting, the way 24 years of Fridays had always felt like waiting. right up until the one morning it stopped being a formality and became the only thing standing between a platform and the dark. What I tell them instead is simpler. I didn't do anything to Viridian that Viridian hadn't already agreed to, in writing, 9 years before Torun Mehta ever learned my name. Loyalty isn't owed to a title, or a badge, or a man clicking a stylus in a glass-walled room. It's owed to the work, and to whoever still shows up for it on an ordinary Friday, unasked and unwatched, for no better reason than that it mattered. Everyone who forgets that eventually learns what it costs to remember too late.